And good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are around the world. I'm Marcus Holmes from the Love and Stuff community. I am the facilitator, and I'm excited to be here again on the 26th day of February. It's our 26th Black History Month moment, and I'm so excited to bring you yet another moment of Black history where we celebrate and laud the accomplishments, the sacrifice, the harrowing events and details, the unique contributions, the brilliance, the ingenuity of persons of African American descent and of African descent. So take a moment right now and click share and tag someone to share in this Black History moment with us. We have been on an extraordinary journey all month long to laud and celebrate and bring information and inspiration to all around the globe. I'm asking right now that you will click share wherever you are so that you can involve someone in this great journey, though we have just 2 more days to go as it relates to our formal presentation. But as a member of our Love and Stuff community, Darren Williams says, our history celebration starts January 1st and ends December 31st of every year. And so we want to continue to celebrate that. Thank you for joining us across various platforms, whether you are on Facebook on the Marcus R. Holmes page or the Love and Stuff page from which we emanate this programming all month long, or if you're with us via Restream on LinkedIn Live or on YouTube events or Twitch TV, you're live with us and we appreciate it, whether it's 1 or 51 or 511. Thank you for over 10,000 views of our Love and Stuff episode from Tuesday and thousands of other views all month long. We appreciate if you've clicked share, if you've clicked like, if you've clicked love or heart or made a comment. We appreciate it all. And you can watch that content on our Love and Stuff page and in many cases on most of the platforms with which we are working currently. And so thank you so very much. I want to remind you that tomorrow we will be back at 7 o'clock p.m. for the close of the nightly 7 p.m. Black History Month moments with a look at gospel music and a few of our gospel music pioneers and giants. And then Sunday at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will culminate our 28 days with a celebration that will have film, video, oration, music, and dramatization, and you don't want to miss it. Some of the great folks within our Love and Stuff community will stand up and shine on Sunday afternoon, evening, depending on where you are, at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we are continuing our look at architecture and the arts. We've been looking at that all week long. Each week we had a different theme all month long. And when we think of architecture and the arts, we think of it broadly to include architects, architecture, buildings and homes, and the arts, which include art forms and genres such as blues and jazz music, sculpture. And tonight we return to talk a little bit about some of the historic landmarks throughout our country, some of them built by African Americans, and some of them erected and or designed by African Americans, yet some in the tribute to the great history and heritage and legacy of African Americans. So we're going to share about 13 of them and share you some photos of those particular architectural pieces as we go. And so first up, we will share a photo that may be familiar to some and maybe not to all. It is the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit, Michigan, where I am. It was founded in 1965 by Detroit physician and community leader Charles H. Wright. This institution is the largest African American historical museum in the world. The museum has more than 30,000 artifacts pertaining to African and African American history, including an extensive collection of Underground Railroad artifacts and documents. And you can learn more information by going to their website if ever you decide after we open back up to make a visit, it would be a great place for you to visit. Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park in Early Mart, California. It was established in 1908 in Allensworth, California, Allensworth, and it was the state's only township that was financed and governed entirely by African Americans. Although the town's success was short-lived because of a severe drought, the site became a state historic park in 1974. The park includes a number of restored early 20th century buildings to give visitors a sense of life at the settlement as its founders knew it. Kingsley Plantation in Jacksonville. So that you can see it better there. The antebellum estate of plantation owner Zephaniah Kingsley and his Senegalese wife Anna Kingsley, a former slave, is the site of the first archaeological dig dedicated to unearthing African American artifacts. The site features an extensive educational exhibit on plantation culture, including an in-depth look into the former slave quarters. Aimed at preserving George Washington Carver's legacy as an educator and intellect, the George Washington Carver National Monument in Diamond, Missouri, looks beyond his better-known achievements as a peanut farmer and food scientist. The monument is home to a museum with educational events and interactive exhibits, as well as a self-guided trail along Williams Pond, where Carver first explored his passion for the natural world. The Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture in Charlotte, with frequent on-site events and film screenings seeking to inspire dialogue among visitors. The Gantt Center is much more than your average African American art museum. In addition to housing both permanent and touring collections, the center also promotes the work of emerging visual and literary artists through online initiatives and public programs. Gantt, the musician's namesake, is an architect and longtime community leader and was the first Black mayor of Charlotte. Maggie L. Walker National Historic Site in Richmond, Virginia. The first Black woman in the United States to found a bank. Walker was a prominent early 20th century advocate for African Americans and women's rights during a time when both groups were considered second-class citizens. Visitors can tour her historic neighborhood, Jackson Ward, as well as her former mansion, which features exhibits that chronicle her life and accomplishments. Established in 1983 as the first wax museum dedicated entirely to African American history, the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum in Baltimore showcases a collection of more than 100 wax figures. The museum features exhibits on significant events and people in Black history, including one showcasing wax models of famous Black residents of Maryland. The Nicodemus National Historic Site in Nicodemus, Kansas. This early settlement was established during Reconstruction after the Civil War as a safe haven for formerly enslaved Kentuckians, and it represents one of the first efforts to settle the Great Plains by African Americans. The site features a visitor center replete with educational displays, as well as 5 restored buildings, 2 of which are open to the public. Paul Laurence Dunbar, one of the first African American poets to gain widespread acclaim, spent the last years of his life in this modest but comfortable Dayton home. The restored early 20th century home exhibits his treasured books and original family furniture, as well as a bicycle built for Dunbar by fellow Dayton residents Orville and Wilbur Wright. Founded to educate the public about the accomplishments of Rosa Parks and other participants in the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott, the Rosa Parks Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, was built on the site of the old Empire Theater, the bus stop at which Parks famously refused to give up her seat to a white person. Exhibits include a replica of the bus on which Parks made her stand, as well as time machines that transport visitors to the segregated Montgomery of the 1950s. Located in far western Massachusetts, the actual childhood home of legendary 20th century Black intellectual and civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois is just a collection of ruins, but visitors can participate in a self-guided walk of the site while facing the serene Houstonic River. The community of Great Barrington also hosts occasional events celebrating the life of Du Bois and other Black leaders. The Frederick Douglass National Historic Site, administered by the National Park Service, is located at 1411 West Street in Southeast Anacostia, a neighborhood east of the Anacostia River in Southeast Washington, D.C. Established in 1988 as a National Historic Site, the site preserves the home and estate of Frederick Douglass, one of the most prominent African Americans of the 19th century. Douglass lived in this house, which he named Cedar Hill from 1877 to 1888 until his death in 1895. Perched on a hilltop, the site offers a sweeping view of the U.S. Capitol and the Washington, D.C. skyline. And the Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument in Wilberforce, Ohio. Officially established in March 2013, the monument memorializes Charles Young, who overcame racism and inequality to become a prominent military leader. Born into slavery, he would become the 3rd African American graduate of West Point and the highest ranking Black officer in the U.S. Army until his death in 1922. So I wanted to highlight many of the historical homes and buildings and museums, and some of them may be well known to some and little known to others, but I hope that you will explore them throughout your journeys. There are a number of other places that are a little bit more well known, and we will mention just a few of those sites in the hopes that you will investigate some of these places, peruse them, explore them, visit them, again as the pandemic, we hope, will lift eventually at some point. Port Chicago and San Francisco. On July 17th, 1944, 320 men, mostly African American sailors, were instantly killed in a massive explosion. 2 ships being loaded with ammunition for the Pacific Theater troops blew up, causing World War II's worst home front disaster. The Pullman Historic District in Chicago. Pullman was an industrial town founded in May 1880 as the realization of George M. Pullman's wish to create a model community for working class people. The historic district includes the Pullman factory and the Hotel Florence, as well as the A. Philip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum, which is dedicated to African American labor history. The Birmingham Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham, Alabama, is located in the city's Civil Rights District, along with the 16th Street Baptist Church, Kelly Ingram Park, and the Carver Theater. It's an interpretive museum which depicts the challenges of the American Civil Rights Movement. The permanent exhibitions are a self-directed tour through Birmingham's place in civil rights history. The National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. The museum complex is built around the former Lorraine Motel, where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in April of 1968. Also part of the museum is the building from which his assassin, James Earl Ray, fired the shot. The museum was renovated in 2014, increasing the number of visits. And I've had the privilege to visit there. I think every African American should stand on that balcony. Every single one of us. Fort Pillow State Park is in Lauderdale County, Tennessee. This over 1,600 acre state park preserves the site of the Battle of Fort Pillow, where 229 of the 262 Black Union soldiers were massacred by Confederate troops. The park, a National Historic Landmark, is now home to an interpretive center and museum. Also in Tennessee, in Memphis, the Beale Street Historic District runs from the Mississippi River to East Street and is one of the birthplaces of the blues. Landmarks include the Beale Street Tap Room, Mr. Handy's Blues Hall, and King's Palace Cafe, which again, you should certainly visit. The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and American Jazz Museum in Kansas, Missouri. The 2 museums share a building as part of the 18th and Vine Historic District. The Negro League Baseball Museum was founded by a group of former Negro League players and honor both the players and the role of the league in the community. The American Jazz Museum features interactive exhibits and films in celebration of jazz and its history. The DuSable Museum of African American History in Chicago is dedicated to the study and preservation of African American history, culture, and art. It opened in 1957 and is known for innovative exhibits like Red, White, Blue, and Black, a history of Blacks in the armed service and freedom, resistance, and the journey toward equality. The National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati. It opened in 2004 in downtown Cincinnati on the banks of the Ohio River, and it has attracted more than 100,000 visitors annually. The museum's mission is to inspire everyone to take part in the modern struggles for freedom by connecting the lessons of the Underground Railroad with today's freedom fighters. Boston African American National Historic Site in Boston. Located in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, this site is home to the Black Heritage Trail and the 1806 African Meeting House, the oldest standing African American church in the United States. The site aims to memorialize the African American community of 19th century Boston that led the city and the nation in the fight against racial injustice. The Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. This museum is dedicated to tracing our common roots to the African continent and emphasizes the global influence of African culture and art. One of the current exhibitions features 26 works, primarily sculptures and installation work by the acclaimed Los Angeles artist Allison Sayre. The Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture in Baltimore. The building, opened in 2005 in honor of entrepreneur and philanthropist Reginald F. Lewis, was designed by renowned African American architect Philip G. Freeland and inspired by a slave ship. The museum prides itself on being the best resource for information about the lives and struggles of African American Marylanders. The International Civil Rights Center and Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina. The building was formerly a Woolworth department store, best known as the site of the February 1st, 1961 sit-in, initiated by 4 Black North Carolina A&T State University students who were refused lunch counter service because of their race. The museum is currently hosting the Americans Who Tell the Truth traveling exhibition of 52 larger-than-life-size portraits of African American heroes. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C. Completed in 2011, the solid granite sculpture of Martin Luther King Jr. represents Dr. King's dedication to civil rights and racial equality, and it can be found in the West Potomac Park near the National Mall. The John Coltrane House in Philadelphia. This was the home of American jazz legend John Coltrane from 1952 to 1967, 2 years before his death. Coltrane was a tenor saxophonist and a composer who played an important role in the development of jazz. The John Coltrane House is also the name of a nonprofit seeking to restore the house and operate it as a museum. Historic Charleston's religious and community buildings in Charleston, South Carolina. The National Register of Historic Places travel itinerary describes 43 historic places in this extraordinary area, including the Old Slave Mart, Old Bethel Methodist, and Emmanuel AME. The Old Slave Mart is the only known surviving building used as a slave auction gallery in South Carolina. Emmanuel AME was built in 1891 and is the oldest African American Methodist church in the South. Dunbar Apartments in New York City. These apartments, located in Harlem, were constructed by John D. Rockefeller in 1926 to provide housing for African Americans. The first project of its kind, the apartments were home to W.E.B. Du Bois, Bill Bojangles Robinson, and Paul Robeson, among others. Fort Mose in St. Augustine, Florida. Founded in 1738 by Spanish colonists, this is the site of the first free Black settlement in the United States. It provided refuge for slaves fleeing from the British colonies and was later one of the original stops of the Underground Railroad. Berkeley Square in Las Vegas. It consisted of 148 ranch-style homes designed by African-American architect Paul R. Williams. Provoked by poor housing conditions for African Americans in Las Vegas, the houses were built between 1954 and 1955 in the area historically known as Vegas West Side and comprised the first minority-built subdivision in Nevada. Pilgrim Baptist Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, was founded in 1863. It is the oldest African American church in Minnesota. The Malcolm X house site in Omaha, Nebraska. Civil rights leader Malcolm X was born in a house on this site. Though the house has been demolished, there is a visitor center and historical marker worth checking out. In New York City, the Langston Hughes House. It's the former home of James Langston Hughes, author, poet, and one of the foremost figures in the Harlem Renaissance. Also in New York, in Rochester, the Underground Railroad Heritage Trail. New York was a major destination for African Americans seeking freedom in the years leading up to the Civil War. This heritage trail followed the routes through Western New York of thousands of enslaved people who made the journey to freedom. There are many interpretive centers, museums, and historic sites along the trail. Harriet Tubman Residence and Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged in Auburn, New York. The home of renowned Underground Railroad leader and the charity she founded for aged and indigent African Americans are both open to the public and illustrate Tubman's life in Auburn between 1859 and 1913. Also worth visiting there is the Thompson AME Zion Church on Parker Street, where she was known to worship. Hinchcliffe Stadium in Paterson, New Jersey. This stadium was the home field for the New York Black Yankees between 1933 and 1937, and again from 1939 to 1945. Hinchcliffe is one of the few surviving stadiums for Black athletes during the segregation era. The Royal House and Slave Quarters in Medford, Massachusetts. In the 18th century, this was the home of the largest slaveholding family in Massachusetts. Now it is the site of a museum containing archaeological artifacts and household items and offers tours and educational programs. The Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Monument in Dorchester County, Maryland, was established as a national monument in March 2013 by former President Barack Obama. It comprises several places of significance to Tubman's life, including the James Cook home site, where she was hired out as a child, and the Jacob Jackson home site, one of the first safe houses on the Underground Railroad. Harriet Beecher Stowe House in Hartford, Connecticut. This was the home of Harriet Beecher Stowe and the place where she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin between 1850 and 1852. The center is dedicated to providing educational experiences and a place to witness and discuss aspects of the author's life and legacy. The Evergreen Plantation. With 37 buildings on the National Historic Register, including 22 slave cabins, Evergreen Plantation is the most intact plantation complex in the South and exemplifies major slave plantations of the antebellum South. Parts of the movie Django Unchained were filmed at this plantation. The Martin Luther King Historic District in Atlanta. This historic site includes Martin Luther King Jr.'s boyhood home and the gravesite and the original Ebenezer Baptist Church, where King was baptized and both his father and he were pastors. The visitor center contains a museum chronicling the American Civil Rights Movement and the instrumental role that Dr. King played. Little Rock Central High School. This National Historic Site is recognized as where the first major confrontation over the implementation of the Brown versus Board of Education 1954 Supreme Court ruling occurred in 1957. 9 African-American students were determined to attend the formerly all-white Central High School and made history with their persistence. Camp Nelson in Jessamine County, Kentucky, was a large Union depot during the Civil War. For a time, Camp Nelson was Kentucky's largest recruitment and training center for Black troops. Thousands of African Americans were emancipated from slavery in exchange for service in the Union Army. Some of them brought their families to live at Camp Nelson. Banneker SW9 Intermediate Boundary Stone, Washington, D.C. One of the original 40 boundary stones for Washington, D.C., this stone commemorates Benjamin Banneker. The free, self-educated African American was a farmer, astronomer, mathematician, and almanac author. Banneker helped survey and plan Washington, D.C. So those are some of the locations and sites that you can visit. Among them, some known and some maybe not as known. And I hope that you will explore those further, those pieces of architect, of property, of buildings, of homes that tell stories and that hold memories and that hold truths of the brilliance, the ingenuity, the indomitable spirit, the creativity, and the unique contributions that African Americans and persons of African descent have contributed to this rich melting pot that we call the United States of America. And think, without many of them and many of these historical sites, what are the privileges that maybe you and I now enjoy that may not have been possible except people traveling the road, the stony roads that were tried. Join me tomorrow night at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here, right where you are. Tune in for our final 7 p.m. Black History Month moment, where we'll highlight gospel music as a part of the art forms that we've been talking about all week, and highlight a special giant in gospel music. And you can tune in tomorrow to learn more about that. And then on Sunday, we culminate our 28-day celebration with a celebration that I believe you will thoroughly enjoy. That includes music, that includes dramatization, that includes oration, and includes some video as well. You don't want to miss it. It's 6:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sunday, February 28th. And I am pleased to announce that our first book, The Gratefulness Journey Every Day, what are you doing for the next 30 days to transform your life, will be on Amazon in just a few short weeks. And you will hear more about the launch party for that book. It will be exclusively on Amazon, and I hope that you will support us in our very first book as a first-time author. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you will follow us on the Love and Stuff page and that you will click share if you've enjoyed this content. Have a grateful evening and see you tomorrow.